Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Ben and I'm a professional photographer based here in North Wales. I cover all sorts of stuff on this channel, mainly photography related, but this one has been quite a long time coming. This is my Camera Basics series. In this series I aim to cover all the bare essentials of how to use your camera and how a photograph is created. Each episode will cover a separate aspect of photography, but this first episode we're going to cover the absolute essentials of how a photograph is created. Now I'll be going more in depth in later videos with everything that I cover in this video, but this first episode should give you a good grasp of what elements are needed to create a photograph. So when you first get your hands on your very first camera, whether it be a DSLR, a mirrorless camera or even a mobile phone, it's so exciting. You can't wait to just get out there shooting anything and everything. But don't expect to get amazing photos with the camera straight out of the box. Just about anyone can pick up a camera, whack it into automatic and fire off some images, and one or two might be pretty good photos. Hell, even I at times am known to just keep the camera in aperture priority, which is a sort of semi-automatic mode, knowing that my camera is smart enough to figure out what's what, and I can 99% of the time rely on it to do the job. Especially with these more modern cameras these days, they know what they're doing. They may well be smarter than you are, and they're almost certainly quicker than you are. But regardless, you cannot rely on a machine at the end of the day, your tool, to make every decision for you. You need to understand the basics of photography to really get the best out of your camera. I would recommend spending at least the first few weeks with your first camera just getting used to it, understanding what all the buttons and dials do. Help, go and watch some other YouTube videos specific to your camera just so that you know what all the buttons do. And it's during this learning process where this first video really comes into its own. So I doubt this is the first video you've come across, so there's a very good chance that you've already heard of the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is made up of three key elements of photography which make up every single photograph you have ever seen, and they are shutter speed, ISO and aperture. But there is one other key element which isn't mentioned in that triangle, an element that we simply would not be able to get photographs without, and that is light. So that clip got corrupted somehow. Let's try again. So in photography, light intensity is measured in what we call stops. This is not to be confused with f-stops, which we'll get to later in the video. So to create a correct exposure, we need to balance out the shutter speed, ISO and aperture within an image so that no one of those is overpowering the others. Looking on the back of your camera or through the viewfinder, you can see there's a lot of information. Some cameras have more, some cameras have less, and on a lot of them you can customize what you actually see in front of you. But if we look at the bottom of this image, there are four areas that you really need to keep an eye on. So over on the left hand side you'll see the big 1.7, that is referring to our aperture. Next to that is the 30, that is our shutter speed. And then over to the right you'll see 800 ISO, obviously that's our ISO. And then right in the middle at the bottom, this is your exposure meter. So right in the middle you'll see a 0, and then either side of that you'll have negative values and positive values. So the 0 in the middle is correct, that's the proper exposure for the scene in front of you. If your marker is in negative values, as it is in this image, that means that your shot is underexposed, which means it'll be really dark. If your marker, however, is on the positive side of the scale, that means it's overexposed, which means it'll be really bright and blown out. So what we need to do is get our marker as close to that 0 as possible to get the correct exposure. This is probably the easiest way of learning how to understand stops and light intensity in photography. So you'll see on the exposure meter that we have 3 positive markers and 3 negative markers. Each of those is 1 full stop of light. You'll also notice though that in between those full stops we have increments of third stops. So every time that you move either the shutter speed, aperture or ISO dials 3 clicks, that will be 1 stop of light. So a photograph is created from light passing through the lens of your camera, entering through the open shutter of your camera and hitting the camera's sensor. Nowadays it's a digital sensor. Way back when, in the olden days, it was film. Now, to really understand these key aspects of photography, you'll always be better off switching your camera into manual mode. On most cameras you'll have a mode dial probably right on the top of the camera, and manual for most brands is just the letter M. So what this will allow you to do is have complete and utter full control over what your camera does. And by doing this, and through trial and error, you'll be able to individually change all of your settings, but most importantly the main 3, shutter speed, ISO and aperture, to really get a grasp of what they do to an image and how they interact with each other. Shutter speed is exactly what you think it is. It's the speed at which the shutter opens and then closes to allow light into the camera. More specifically, we're actually measuring the amount of time that the shutter is open for, rather than the actual speed at which the shutter moves. Now, shutter speed is measured in seconds, or more commonly in fractions of seconds, because it's really quick. Now, these fraction of second values also equate to stops, as in stops of light. So, as an easy example, if your half-second exposure is showing as -1 on your exposure meter, then halving it to 1/4 of a second will halve the amount of light entering the camera, changing the light meter by 1 stop to the 0 mark, a correct exposure. And therefore there's a difference of 1 stop of light between half a second and 1/4 of a second. Easy, right? Talk about easy, ISO is probably the easiest of the 3 aspects to actually explain to you. Now, you don't really need to know what ISO stands for, as it really holds no relevance to photography. You don't need to know it. Very simply, what ISO is the sensitivity of the camera's sensor to light. And this is very much the same as way back when we were shooting on film. Every film has a speed and ASA rating. This is pretty much the same as today's ISO on a digital sensor, only when you're shooting on film you can't just change your ASA halfway through a roll. Most modern cameras today will have a base ISO of 100, this being the lowest or normal sensitivity of the camera sensor. In most daytime outdoor shooting, because of that sun up in the sky, there's generally more than enough light available to you that you can happily shoot at ISO 100. However, when it gets dark, such as in this room behind me, I would probably want to boost my ISO up a bit. So very much like shutter speed, ISO is also measured in stops, and very much like shutter speed, one stop would be the same as doubling my base ISO. So going from ISO 100 to 200 would be one stop of difference. And then the same again, if my image was still too dark, I would move one more stop by doubling the 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600 to 3200 to 6400. You get the idea, it just keeps going. An easy way to think of this is as if you're adding artificial light. You're just creating light by boosting the ISO. So yeah, that's pretty easy as well, right? Now then, number 3, Aperture. Aperture is a bit of a funny one, but still fairly simple in principle. Again, Aperture is measured in stops, but the numbering system is completely different and makes no sense at all, unless you want to get really nerdy about it. Check this link. Quite simply, aperture refers to the size of the hole within your lens. You'll have to excuse the dust here. So this is one of my old Pentax lenses from a film camera, and this will be a very easy way of me demonstrating to you what aperture looks like. Take that filter off. So here's our lens. As you may be able to see, there's a great big hole in the middle of it. Now this at the moment is wide open. This is at f2. If I change this by one stop to f2.8, you'll see that that hole in the middle just got smaller. Then if we go again to f4, smaller again. We'll carry on going to 5.6, f8, f11, until we're right the way down at f22. And you can still just about see that tiny little pinhole in the middle of the lens. So that, quite simply, is aperture. It is the size of the hole in your glass. These days, there are still some lenses that you can get with the actual aperture markings on the lens with manual adjustment, such as my Leica 15mm, and I love it. But in most modern cameras, it's all controlled just using one of your dials on the camera electronically to the lens. So in terms of exposure, obviously the wider the hole you have, the more light is able to get in, and the smaller the hole you have, the less light can get in, and that's how aperture affects exposure. And that's the easy bit on aperture. So aperture, as I mentioned near the start of the video, is measured in f-stops. Yeah, more stops. To save confusion, it seems to be a general consensus among photographers that aperture is just referred to by an f number. For example, f2 or f4, f8, so on. But it's still not that simple. So you might think that with a nice wide hole, that must be a really big number. No. So the wider an aperture you have is actually a smaller f number. So with my lens that I just showed you, for example, f2 was wide open and f22 was tiny little pinhole. So the most common denominations of an f number are f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16, f22. And as I say, on most older lenses you'll actually see these denominations written on the side of your lens. So same again, changing your aperture by one stop will either halve or double the amount of light. This is where the f numbers don't really make much sense. So let's use f2 and f2.8 for example, there is one stop of difference between those two values, but f2.8 hasn't been halved and f2 hasn't been doubled. That's where aperture and f numbers can get a bit confusing. So using these three values, shutter speed, ISO and aperture, we're able to combine those values to create a correct exposure of the scene we are photographing. So a couple of examples. Let's say we're shooting a landscape scene. Now generally speaking, you go out to shoot landscapes during the daytime. So generally speaking, there is plenty of light about. So ISO can be set right down at the base value of 100. From here, it's quite likely that you may use a aperture of f8, seeing as if we were wide open at f2, that would probably be far too much light. And then to balance that out, a normal shutter speed might be around 1/250th of a second, depending on just how bright it is outside. Now let's say you're shooting a sports event like football or rugby. So because there's a lot of fast action going on, you'll want to use a fast shutter speed to freeze frame the action. Otherwise your shots are just going to be blurry. In which case we'd crank up the shutter speed to maybe 1,000th or 2,000th of a second. And then to be able to balance out that shutter speed, you'd want to let more light into the camera by opening your aperture, making it wider, so let's say f2 or f4, and then after a couple of test shots you can decide just how bright or how dark your image is and what you need to do with your ISO. Boosting the ISO from 100 even just to 200 or 400, that can make a great difference in your images. And then from one extreme to the other, let's say you're shooting some astrophotography, capturing the night sky. So obviously now it is pitch black. You might have the moon out, you might not, but otherwise all you can see is these little dots of light in the sky. So this means that you're going to be wanting a very long exposure, probably anywhere between 5 and 30 seconds. However, this will probably still be too dark. So we're going to want to really widen our aperture, get it wide open to f2 or even wider if your lens will go wider. And then in terms of ISO, we'll probably want to start off at roughly 3200 or 1600, do a couple of test shots, see how they're looking and try and adjust it from there. Now that's as far as I'm going in this video, but each of the three main aspects that we've covered here, shutter speed, ISO and aperture, they all have their own certain characteristics which can really affect your image for better or worse depending on what you want from your image. So I will be going into those all individually in future episodes, so if you want to learn more, make sure you hit subscribe down in the bottom corner there and the notification bell as well. That means you'll actually get notified when I post new videos. But for now, take what I've said in this video, get your camera in manual mode and just start playing with it. Learn how these three aspects interact with each other to give you different images in different shooting situations as well. Whether it's in your living room or up out in the hills, try and find some different scenarios with different lighting situations to practice what I've been teaching in this video. And I'm sure given a few attempts or so, you should start getting the grasp of it, learning how to use your camera. So if you're new to photography, we've all been there ourselves. I wish I had this video 3.5 years ago when I first got a camera. Drop a comment down below, let me know how you're getting along. I'm always happy to talk about what I do, always eager to help people learn, and even if you're not new to photography, maybe there's something new that you just learned, let me know. So I'm going to leave you there. thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like it and you got something from it, give it a like down below, and like I say, hit subscribe if you want to see more. I am super busy at the moment shooting weddings and whatnot, but I will aim to get more of these videos out fairly soon, but we'll see how that goes. So thank you again, and I'll see you soon.